various.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. I have an Arabic version as well. I can send it to you if you.
Oh yeah, that will be happy because some of us could understand only Arabics. And
Jamil.
we have
Jamil.
two versions that will be better.
So today I'm speaking Arabic or English? Both are
English,
fine.
English. Yeah, but probably some audience will ask you in Arabic. That would be also okay.
أهلا وسهلا. أهلا وسهلا. I'm sending you the book now.
Give us a couple more minutes to wait for one more person.
Yeah,
first.
I'm here as you wish. I'm here. Barakallah. Ya Allah.
Inshallah, we will begin shortly, Professor Jasir, because we have a recitation of the Quran prior to listening to the various opening remarks. And then inshallah, and the opening session will be in Bahasa. I know you are very familiar with Bahasa.
Yeah. No problem. No, I understand a lot of
yeah,
words.
so many similarities. Inshallah, Bapak-bapak, inshallah kita mulai akan dimoderatori oleh Ustadz Miftahul Haq. Alhamdulillah Pak Rektor, Pak Ketua BPH juga sudah hadir. Insya-Allah kita mulai sebentar lagi. Silakan Pak Ustadz. Ustadz Miftah. Mohon teman yang menjadi admin untuk ke YouTube bisa sekalian diberi kode kalau sudah siap ke YouTube. Kita mulai saja. Izin Pak Rektor sama Pak Agung. Mas Iwul bisa mulai ke YouTube ya.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
Yang
wabarakatuh.
terhormat Rektor Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta, Profesor Dr. Insinyur Gunawan Budianto MA. Yang terhormat Bapak Dr. Haji Agung Danarto MAG selaku Ketua BPH UMY, yang sama-sama kita muliakan Profesor Jasir Auda, dan Bapak Ibu sekalian yang dirahmati dan diberkahi oleh Allah Subhanahu wa taala. Alhamdulillah pada pagi hari ini kita dapat hadir di tempat virtual ini untuk bersama-sama nanti akan berdiskusi, dan sebelumnya kita akan melaunching sebuah center di UMY yang dinamakan dengan Center for Integrative Science and Islamic Civilization Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta. Rangkaian acara kita yang pertama nanti adalah kita mendengarkan beberapa kata pembuka atau sambutan dari pimpinan universitas, dan selanjutnya nanti akan di-launching oleh Bapak Rektor untuk center ini, dan setelah itu kita akan langsung webinar on reorientation Islamic Scholarship. Bapak Ibu yang dirahmati oleh Allah Subhanahu wa taala, mari kita buka kegiatan ini membaca basmalah secara bersama-sama. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Bapak Ibu yang dirahmati oleh Allah Subhanahu wa taala, untuk memulai kegiatan ini izinkan saya membacakan dua buah ayat dari ayat Al-Qur'an. A'udzu billahi minasy syaithanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wa man a'rada an dzikri fa inna lahu ma'isatan dhanka wa nahsuruhu yaumal qiyamati a'ma. Qala rabbi lima hasyartani a'ma wa qad kuntu basira. Shadaqallahul azim. Baik Bapak Ibu yang dirahmati oleh Allah Subhanahu wa taala, selanjutnya kita akan mendengarkan sambutan dari Ketua BPH UMY kepada beliau Bapak Dr. Haji Agung Danarto MAG, dipersilakan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin wa bihi nasta'inu ala umuri dunya waddin. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah wa asyhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Amma ba'du. Yang terhormat Bapak Rektor Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta, Bapak Profesor Dr. Insinyur Gunawan Budianto, yang kami muliakan Syekh Profesor Dr. Jasir Auda, yang berbahagia seluruh hadirin hadirat. Oh ya, hadir juga nampak di layar Bapak Habib Hirzin, sesepuh dan senior kita di Persyarikatan Muhammadiyah, dan seluruh hadirin hadirat rahimakumullah. Allah Subhanahu wa taala berfirman, A'udzubillahi minasyaitonir rajim. Inna fi khalqis samawati wal ardi wa ikhtilafil laili wan nahari laayatil liulil albab alladzina yadhkuruna Allaha qiyaman wa qu'udan wa 'ala junubihim wa yatafakkaruna fi khalqis samawati wal ardi rabbana ma khalaqta hadza batila wa subhanaka faqina adzabannar. Bapak-bapak dan ibu-ibu sekalian, bahwasannya ayat-ayat kauniyah dan ayat-ayat qauliyah itu adalah satu kesatuan yang integratif. Semuanya berasal dari Allah dan semuanya adalah diciptakan oleh Allah Subhanahu wa taala. Sehingga ketika masa awal, ketika ayat pertama kali diturunkan perintah untuk membaca, perintah untuk iqra, maka kemudian seluruh umat Islam pada waktu itu memiliki semangat yang sangat tinggi untuk belajar, untuk mengkaji ilmu pengetahuan, yang mereka tidak memilahkan antara ayat-ayat kauniyah dan ayat-ayat qauliyah, karena semuanya adalah bersumber dari Allah, sehingga karenanya secara ontologi, ilmu pengetahuan, baik sains ataupun kalamullah itu adalah bersumber dari Allah, sehingga secara ontologi adalah tauhid. Kemudian secara epistemologi mereka juga mengintegrasikan antara ayat-ayat kauniyah dan ayat-ayat qauliyah, sehingga karenanya betapa luar biasanya semangat dedikasi kaum muslimin pada waktu itu untuk mencari ilmu, dan ilmu yang berkembang di dunia pada saat itu secara dengan penuh antusias dikaji, dipelajari oleh umat muslimin, baik itu ilmu yang berkembang di Romawi, di Yunani, di Persia, di India, di Cina, dan di seluruh belahan dunia, kemudian dipelajari dengan sedemikian rupa, kemudian diintegrasikan dengan nilai-nilai Al-Quran dan As-Sunnah, sehingga menjadilah ilmu yang secara ontologi mendukung tauhid, secara epistemologi kemudian terintegrasi antara ilmu sains dan ilmu agama, dan secara aksiologi kemudian mendukung fungsi manusia sebagai khalifatullah untuk menciptakan rahmatan lil alamin. Dengan semangat dan antusiasme serta faham integrasi keilmuan yang seperti itu kemudian menyebabkan kaum muslimin pada generasi awal menguasai peradaban dunia dengan semangat keilmuan yang mereka miliki, dan selama berabad-abad kemudian menguasai puncak peradaban dunia. Baru kemudian ketika kaum muslimin barangkali mulai melakukan dikotomi, melakukan sekularisasi antara ilmu agama dengan ilmu sains, maka kemunduran mulai terjadi di banyak tempat. Dan sampai saat ini barangkali kemunduran itu belum mulai ada titik kulminasi untuk naik, atau baru saja barangkali upaya-upaya dilakukan oleh orang-orang Islam, para sarjana, untuk bagaimana mengembangkan ilmu pengetahuan yang bisa membawa peradaban yang maju. Nah, Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta sebagai salah satu perguruan tinggi milik Persyarikatan Muhammadiyah yang membawa tagline Islam Berkemajuan, mengharapkan atau menginginkan agar nilai-nilai Islam yang difahami dan diamalkan oleh Muhammadiyah adalah Islam yang bisa mendrive, bisa mendorong kemajuan peradaban umat Islam khususnya yang ada di Indonesia. Apa yang sudah dilakukan oleh Muhammadiyah pada abad pertama dengan melakukan transformasi pengetahuan sudah berhasil sedemikian rupa, terbukti dengan banyaknya amal usaha, pendidikan, dan di bidang yang lainnya yang didirikan, dikembangkan oleh Muhammadiyah, dan pada abad kedua ini menjadi tanggung jawab dan tugas tasdid abad kedua adalah bagaimana mengintegrasikan semuanya dan menjadikan Islam, nilai-nilai ajaran Islam sebagai basis untuk pengembangan ilmu pengetahuan dan teknologi untuk memajukan peradaban dunia. Dan dengan berdasarkan hal itulah kemudian CISIC, Center for Integrative Science and Islamization Civilization, and Islamic Civilization ini kemudian didirikan, harapannya akan bisa menopang, memacu pengembangan ilmu pengetahuan di lingkungan kampus Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta khususnya, dan Persyarikatan Muhammadiyah pada umumnya untuk bisa membawa kepada peradaban yang lebih maju. Mudah-mudahan Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala meridhoi apa yang kita upayakan ini dan bisa memberikan manfaat yang sebesar-besarnya untuk Persyarikatan Muhammadiyah dan untuk umat Islam secara keseluruhan. Terima kasih kepada semua pihak yang sudah membantu berdirinya CISIC ini, dan tentu kontribusi partisipasi selalu kita harapkan. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih disampaikan kepada Bapak Dr. Haji Agung Danarto MAG. Selanjutnya adalah sambutan dari Rektor UMY sekaligus melaunching Center for Integrative Science and Islamic Civilization di Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta. Pada yang terhormat Bapak Profesor Dr. Insinyur Gunawan Budianto MP, dipersilahkan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahilladzi lahu ma fis samawati wa ma fil ard wa lahul hamdu fil akhirati wa huwal hakimul khabir. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la syarikalah wa asyhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Ana ya banda raditu billahi robba wa bil islam dinah Nabi Muhammad ya wa rasulah. Rabbi zidni ilma warzuqni fahma. Pertama kami dengan terhormat kepada Bapak Dr. Haji Agung Danarto MAG, Ketua Badan Pembina Harian UMY, yang saya hormati Bapak Profesor Dr. Samsul Anwar, Ketua Majelis Tarjeh Pimpinan Pusat Muhammadiyah, yang saya hormati teman-teman dari penggiat pusat studi atau Center for Integrative Science and Islamic Civilization, and also for special to thank you very much for joining this forum, Professor Dr. Yasser Auda. It's my pleasure to say welcome to our university forum to in the integrating between Islam and science. Dan juga teman-teman sekalian, pertama atas nama pimpinan universitas kami ucapkan terima kasih dan selamat kepada teman-teman penggiat dari Center for Integrative Science and Islamic Civilization. Tentunya ini sebuah cita-cita panjang untuk mewujudkan dari visi kita. So as you know, we are having our vision of Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta is to become a university that excels in the development of the science and technology based on Islamic values for the benefit of the people. Jadi di sini kita melihat bahwa kita punya visi menjadi universitas yang unggul dalam pengembangan ilmu pengetahuan, teknologi dengan berlandaskan nilai-nilai Islam demi kemaslahatan umat. Di sini kita melihat ada trilogi yang luar biasa dari apa-apa yang sudah digariskan oleh bapak-bapak pendahulu kita. Pertama adalah kognisi. Ya. Jadi kognisi itu diperlambangkan dengan menguasai, bahkan mengembangkan ilmu pengetahuan dan teknologi. Kemudian afeksi. Ya. Afeksi itu tentunya adalah soft skill beragama, ya. Jadi penguasaan kognisi itu harus dilandaskan kepada nilai-nilai Islam, dan psikomotoriknya adalah untuk kemaslahatan umat. Nah, jadi di sini kemaslahatan umat itu merupakan pintu gerbang bagi terbentuknya peradaban yang mulia. Nah, dari visi Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta yang kita miliki ini sebetulnya kita menggambarkan secara jelas bagaimana integrasi antara sains dan Islamic values untuk kemudian mencetak sebuah generasi yang unggul dengan peradaban yang unggul. Nah, jadi tentunya ini merupakan sebuah strategi yang cukup jitu. Bagaimana agar supaya upaya-upaya untuk membuat sinergi antara ilmu pengetahuan, teknologi, dan Islam itu bisa lebih cepat. Sehingga memang teman-teman aktivis di sini yang kemudian juga dimotori oleh Pak Agung Danarto sebagai Ketua Badan Pembina Harian, ya, untuk mempercepat aktivitas, ya, Center for Integrative Science and Islamic Civilization. Artinya apa? Kita melihat bahwa dua-duanya itu saling berkaitan. Ya. Jadi tentunya bukan cuma sekedar integratif, tapi juga interconnection. Ya. Interconnection between science and Islamic values. Saya pikir ini sebuah upaya yang luar biasa tentunya, dan nanti bisa bekerjasama dengan Lembaga Pengembangan Pendidikan LPP yang di dalam struktur kurikulum konstruksi berpikir dari apa yang dihasilkan oleh teman-teman dari CISIC ini itu bisa bersinergi dengan kurikulum. Memang upaya-upaya kita untuk selalu menginternalisasikan Al-Quran ke dalam mata kuliah sudah kita mulai tahun 2008. Tapi yang jelas memang kita butuh booster. Nah, booster itulah kita harapkan berasal dari Center for Integrative Science and Islamic Civilization. Jadi booster ini akan mempercepat pencapaian dari apa yang terkandung konten dari visi Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta. Dan itu yang bisa saya sampaikan, dan dengan mengucapkan Bismillahirrahmanirrahim dan selalu memohon ridho dan rahmat dari Allah Subhanahu wa taala, maka Center for Integrative Science and Islamic Civilization Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta secara resmi dapat kita mulai dan kita launching bersama. Terima kasih. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih disampaikan kepada Bapak Rektor, Bapak Profesor Dr. Insinyur Gunawan Budianto MP. Bapak Ibu yang berbahagia, sebelum nanti kita masuk ke webinar, kita akan mendengarkan amanah dari Ketua Majelis Tarsi dan Tajsid Pimpinan Pusat Muhammadiyah. Kepada beliau Bapak Profesor Dr. Samsul Anwar MA, dipersilahkan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alhamdulillahilladzi hadana li hadza wa ma kunna linahtadiya laula an hadana Allah. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la syarikalah wa asyhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala hadzal nabiyil karim wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajmain. Sebelumnya saya mohon maaf karena tadi ada problem koneksi sehingga agak susah masuk, karena ini sedang kuliahnya di stop sebentar, jadi koneksi dalam ruang kelas kurang bagus. Baik, yang saya hormati Ketua BPH UMY Bapak Dr. Haji Agung Danarto, MAG, beserta seluruh anggota pimpinan BPH UMY, yang saya hormati Bapak Rektor Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta, Bapak Profesor Dr. Insinyur Gunawan Budianto MP IPM, dan seluruh jajaran pimpinan UMY, beserta seluruh dekan, ketua jurusan, para anggota senat, dan yang lain-lainnya. Dan juga yang saya hormati, our special and distinguished guest, Profesor Dr. Jasir Auda, moderator, dan seluruh partisipan yang hadir secara online. Majelis Tarjih dan Tajdid pimpinan Muhammadiyah sebagai satu institusi dalam Muhammadiyah yang bertugas antara melakukan pengkajian ajaran Islam di lingkungan Muhammadiyah untuk menjadi pedoman bagi warga Muhammadiyah secara khusus dan umat Islam secara luas yang memerlukannya, menyambut baik dan menyokong berdirinya Center for Integrative Science and Islamic Civilization, CISIC, yang diinisiasi oleh Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta sebagai sebuah institusi pendidikan tinggi di bawah naungan Muhammadiyah. Sebagaimana disebutkan dalam proposal panitia, tujuan khusus pendirian CISIC adalah mengkaji peradaban Islam dalam perspektif filosofis, historis, dan etnis, menyusun kerangka epistemologi dan metodologi pengajaran, penelitian, dan pengabdian yang terintegratif, menggali kembali warisan intelektual peradaban Islam pramodern, dan menunjukkan relevansinya dengan kehidupan kontemporer kita. Kemudian mendorong penerbitan karya tulis dan bahan ajar yang berparadigma integratif, menyediakan basis intelektual untuk gerakan pembaharuan Muhammadiyah. Kelima butir tujuan ini, khususnya butir pertama, ketiga, dan kelima, berarsiran atau beririsan dengan tugas Majelis Tarjih dan Tajdid, yang antara lain adalah melakukan pengkajian ajaran Islam untuk merespon berbagai persoalan sosial dan kemanusiaan dari perspektif Islam. Untuk itu, dalam Majelis Tarjih dan Tajdid dikembangkan suatu pendekatan yang juga integratif. Manhaj tarjih itu didefinisikan sebagai suatu sistem pengkajian yang berpijak pada 4 komponen yang meliputi wawasan, sumber, pendekatan, prosedur, dan teknis yang keseluruhannya memiliki sifat integratif. Saya bacakan versi Inggris ya, biar juga Profesor Jasir Auda sudah hadir apa belum ya? Profesor Jasir Auda belum ya?
Sudah Prof.
Oh iya. One of Muhammadiyah's main and traditional activities is to provide education for the wider community from early childhood to higher education. To support this activity, Muhammadiyah as a Da'wah movement has developed an integrative educational philosophy for higher education related to the advancement of science, technology, and art. The philosophy asserts science, technology, and art are the result of holistic and comprehensive rational thinking on the reality of the universe, or ayat kauniyah, and on revelation and sunnah of the prophet, or ayat qauliyah, which is an integral unit through continuous research and development activities for the glory of humans in a sustainable life. Science, technology, and art are the higher value in all human cultures. Islam, with its main sources, the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet, strongly encourages the advancement of them by asserting that people who believe in God and have knowledge will be exalted to high ranks in the inside of Allah. And people who carry out scientific studies and research are seen as tracing the way to heaven. The Western Orientalist observer Franz Rosenthal described the Islamic religious view of science by stating that ilm, or knowledge, is one of the concepts that dominates Islam and gives a distinctive shape and complexion to the Muslim civilization. There is no word in Islam that equal the word ilm in its depth of meaning and breadth of use, not even words like Tawhid, Ad-Din, and the like. There is no branch of the intellectual, religious, political, and even daily life of an ordinary Muslim that remains untouched by widespread attitude toward knowledge as an element of supreme value existence of a Muslim. This Rosenthal say about the attitude of Muslim toward knowledge. Science is something that is essentially natural. However, the pattern of its advancement and use must be based on high ethical values. And for Islam, it must be in harmony with the universal teaching of Islamic religion and avoid contradictions to the basic faith so that it can truly become a source of human welfare, both materially or spiritual. I think the public discussion that CISIC brings today is the theme of reorienting Islamic scholarship will be very important. This activity represents CICI's first step in an effort to build awareness about the importance of integrated paradigm and the advancement of science, technology, and art. Our speaker, Professor Dr. Yasir Auda, by now is a contemporary Muslim thinker whose writings are widely read. He was ever present at one of the Tarjih Council forums a few years ago before the onset of COVID-19. Thanks a lot for Professor Yasir Auda. I think that's all what I can convey, and thank you for all the attention of the audience. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Before hello, I want to say I cannot participate in this public discussion because I have many classes today. And at the moment, I have to break my class to give this speech. Thanks once again.
بارك الله فيكم. جزاك الله خير.
Baik, terima kasih.
Jazakumullah.
Baik, terima kasih disampaikan kepada beliau Bapak Profesor Dr. Haji Samsul Anwar MA selaku Ketua Majelis Tarjih dan Tajdid Pimpinan Pusat Muhammadiyah. Bapak Ibu yang berbahagia, kita akan langsung mengikuti webinar on reorienting Islamic Scholarship yang akan dipandu langsung oleh Bapak Muhammad Muzakir. Kita tutup dulu kegiatan pembukaan ini dan baca hamdalah. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Saja kepada Mas Rafiq, dipersilakan.
Ya, terima kasih Mas Miftah. Inshallah, this session will be held in 2 languages or even 3, English, Indonesia, and Arabic. But our speaker and me myself will warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin wa bihi nasta'inu ala umuri dunya waddin wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil mursalin sayyidina wa maulana Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. I would like to begin by expressing my deep gratitude to all the 3 speakers before this session. Bapak Profesor Dr. Gunawan Budianto, our rector, and then Pak Dr. Bapak Agung, who is the head of our board of trustee, and then Bapak Profesor as the head of the Majelis Tarjih, who have conveyed a very important message about the relevance, the importance of this new institution, CISIC. By the way, we are still debating whether we pronounce it in Indonesian way, CISIC, or in American or English way, CISIC. That is still under the discussion. Also, I would like to welcome to all participants in this very first public discussion of CISIC of UMY. Inshallah, we want to make this discussion as a regular event, and the purpose behind such a program is to enrich, our imagination about Islamic epistemology. We need to have our public space being filled by the discussions about Islamic philosophy, Islamic knowledge, and Islamic civilization. And the second purpose is to build a global network for Muhammadiyah and for UMY in particular, not a network in general sense, but more specifically a network of scholar. So it's a kind of scholarly networks. And thirdly, the purpose behind this public discussion is to raise an awareness to show about the importance of the integrative science and the study of civilization. We are very delighted to have our speaker today, Sheikh Professor Jasir Auda, or if you want to pronounce it in Egyptian, Amia, Professor Jasir Auda. He is the president of Maqasid Institute. I myself consider him as my teacher in a literal sense, because I took his course in Virginia back in 2018 when I was still in my first year in my BSc degree in the United States. We want to discuss with him his latest publication entitled Re-envisioning Islamic Scholarship, Maqasid Methodology as a New Approach, which perfectly match with our concern, which is Islamic epistemology and the issue of interconnectivity and the issue of integration of knowledge. He is well-known scholar, or even I could say phenomenal scholar. As Pak Samsul said, his writing is widely read in the Islamic world. If we check Google Scholar, his magnum opus, a book on Maqasid Syariah, this book has been cited more than 12,000 times. It's incredible. And back in 2016, I remember we in Majelis Tarjih invited him to give a public talk on the issue of Maqasid and giving fatwa and Islamic thought in general. He's well known as a reformist thinker, initially in legal issues, but now more broadly in Islamic thought or epistemology in general. He's currently residing in Canada. He has his PhD in the philosophy of Islamic law from the University of Wales, UK, and PhD, the second PhD in the system analysis from the University of Waterloo, Canada. Early in his life, he memorized the Quran and undertook traditional studies at the study circles of Al-Azhar Mosque in Cairo, Egypt. He memorized the Quran very well. He understands traditional sciences, of course. He has held professional position at the University of Waterloo and Carleton in Canada, Alexandria, Egypt, Faculty of Islamic Studies in Qatar, American University of Sharjah in UAE, and University of Brunei Darussalam in Brunei. Probably sometime in the future, we in UMY, Professor Jasir, will invite you as a visiting professor, or at least give another talk in front of our audience. And then he continues to lecture on Islam and its law internationally, and he's written 25 books, again, 25 books in Arabic and English, some of which has been translated into 25 languages. So 25 books translated into 25 languages, incredible. Before he start enlightening us, giving us, his ideas, let me mention to you one fact that he himself, Jasir Audah, Dr. Jasir Audah himself mentioned in the introduction of the book, or in the preface of the book. Back in 2016, he was in dilemma between writing a book on philosophy or writing a book on the Quran. Then he got a dream where he saw our Prophet Muhammad SAW reading the Quran in his dream. Since then, he realized that it is a sign, an ayah from Allah, alama from Allah, that he needs to embark a journey on a project of epistemology based on revelation, based on wahyu. Therefore, the book that we are going to talk about or to discuss about is inspired by dream seeing our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Well, without further ado, we will give our microphone the chance to our Sheikh Jasir Audah. Time is yours, Professor Jasir.
Allah يكرمك. ما شاء الله. الله يكرمك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم
بسم
السلام.
الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أسعد الخلق وخاتم الرسل محمد صلى الله عليه وآله، ورضي الله عن المهاجرين والأنصار ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين، ثم أما بعد. Thank you very much, my dear brothers, with all titles and positions in place. I will start by saying my brothers and sisters in Islam. This is the highest rank that we have. Of course, my thanks to Professor Rector Dr. Budianto, and also Professor Shamsul Anwar and Dr. Danartu, as well as Ustad Muftah al-Haq and my dear brother Dr. Muhammad Rafiq. I am really delighted to be back at the Muhammadiyah University, despite being online. I was telling my brother Dr. Muhammad, inshallah, within a few months, I am planning to be in Southeast Asia in a tour. Be more than happy to visit, inshallah. This topic made me very happy that you invited me to speak to, because the need for integrative approaches and the need for studying the Islamic civilization is very high. We have some major challenges as an ummah, and it is essential that we go back to our roots, the study of the Quran and the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and take from our roots to our reality. But the big question of how is a very complex question. It requires research. It requires the minds and hearts of the ummah to develop a methodology, an approach on how we can approach the Quran and the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in order to have that renaissance that we are dreaming about. Let me, for the sake of the viewers, share some slides because I think this will be easier for you to follow. And inshallah, I'll try to stick to the wordings here. My talk aims to actually put some foundation for the Center for Integrative Sciences and Islamic Civilization, because sometimes people talk about Islamic civilization, but they do not come from an Islamic perspective. They come, for example, from an Orientalist perspective, and therefore destroy the Islamic civilization instead of teaching about the Islamic civilization. And sometimes people talk about sciences, but they do not talk about ilm. As I heard now, ilm as knowledge, sometimes people approach sciences on a philosophy that is not Islamic, and therefore they miss the mark and they lose their way when it comes to that. My brother mentioned that humble book that I wrote that is called Re-Envisioning Islamic Scholarship, and I sent copies to my brother. If you're interested, please contact Dr. Muhammad Rafiq. And I'm going to be speaking about the religion and science and knowledge and logic and so on. Let me go straight to the points. Number one, it is very important to define our source of knowledge, our epistemology, as my brothers mentioned. What is the epistemological basis of our science? When we think, when we do research, what exactly are we basing our research on? And there is a difference between the Quranic terms and the terms that we pronounce now in the English language or in Latin or in any other language other than the language of the Quran. The Arabic, by the way, is not the language of the Arabs. Arabic in the Quran is the language of the Quran. Lisanan, bilisanin Arabiyyin mubin. It's a lisan, it's a tongue. It's not about the Arabs and Qahtan and Adnan and Arabia and Egypt. It's not about that. Arabic is not about these people. Arabic is about the tongue. So whoever speaks the tongue, even if you live in Indonesia and it's a major part of the Ummah, or you live in Africa, or you live in North America where I live, you are Arab and you are part of the language of the Quran. The language of the Quran teaches us a number of terms. The term deen and the Latin or English in that sense would be religion. The term ilm versus science, the term fiqh versus law, the term faqih versus scholar, the term ijtihad versus legal reasoning. And actually, ijtihad is not legal reasoning. And a faqih is not a scholar or a jurist. And fiqh is not law. And ilm is not science. And deen is not religion. Because deen is a way of life. Religion is a pact of men who control a certain nation by having a certain covenant between them. Deen is a covenant between us and Allah, not between us and a group of people, or a church, or an authority, or a council. In Islam, we don't have that. In Islam, deen is between us and Allah, and we follow Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ilm is something that is tied to knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it is different from science. And I was going to be talking now about social sciences and natural sciences and applied sciences and so forth. When we talk social sciences, ilm in Islam is very different from what Durkheim said, or what Darwin mentioned, or Freud, or any of these folks. Ilm in Islam has a very different basis, a very different definition of the human, a very different definition of reality and truth and logic and so forth. Fiqh is not law. Fiqh is understanding. And fiqh includes law, but fiqh in Islam includes science. Science is a chapter of fiqh. When we think about ilm, as in chemistry and physics and zoology and psychology and so forth, Architecture is part of fiqh. Politics is part of fiqh. Economics in Islam is a chapter of fiqh. Economics is not a secular science. And therefore, when we talk fiqh, we are supposed to be talking everything about life. A faqih, therefore, is not necessarily a jurist or a clergy. We don't have this concept in Islam. In Islam, we don't have a particular category of people with particular clothing who are men of God. Anybody could be a man or a woman of God, because a faqih is somebody with a deep understanding. You could be a physician or a medical doctor and you are a faqih. You could be somebody who studied languages and you're a faqih. You could be somebody who studied law and you're a faqih, but that's not the only kind. Ijtihad, which is what this center, inshallah, is going to be doing, is not equal to legal reasoning. Legal reasoning is one form of ijtihad, but we need ijtihad in economics. In fact, this is very important. The current economic system is ribawi, writ large, and is full of monopoly and is full of injustice and gharar and ghish, and it has every haram that we have in the Islamic economics, the current capitalist system. And we need ijtihad in order to change that into a different kind of system. How do we think about economics from an Islamic point of view? That is ijtihad. How we think about architecture from an Islamic point of view, how we think about politics, how we think about management, all of this is tied to the source of knowledge, which is al-wahy. That book that was revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam on that mountain of Hira is going to be the basis for our reality, for our truth as Muslims. It doesn't mean that we isolate ourselves from others, we learn from others, but it means that we are genuine about Islam and that we take Islam seriously. We are not going to apologize for other philosophies or other theories that are not Islamic. I'm very happy to see in the mission of the new center interconnectivity. And let me add connectivity and purpose. So when we connect, we have to connect with a purpose, with a maqsid, with an objective. And it's very important to combine in our logic connectivity and purpose. Things are connected. Allah created them this way in order for Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala, to achieve certain purposes or to realize certain purposes in our reality. And therefore, if we really take connectivity and purpose as our logic, we are not going to fall into some very disturbing problems that the current Islamic thought suffers from. My brothers, our profs, talked about al-aqli wal-naqli, al-ayat al-kawniyya wal-ayat al-munazzala. We're talking about a way of looking at the naqli, or the inherited knowledge, and a way of looking at al-aqli, or the rational knowledge, or the thinking about the signs in the universe. And we are supposed to integrate this. That's what we mean by integration. It's very important before we move forward to define al-aqli and naqli very well, because sometimes we define al-aqli as secular, but al-aql is not secular in Islam. Al-aql is to use your mind and use your logic and use your observation, but to build that knowledge, as our prof mentioned, rector mentioned, on the Islamic values. And that is aqli. Oftentimes, when we study aqli, we go study economics from an American textbook, or we study history from an English textbook or something, or we study about the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ from an Orientalist, from the German school or from the French school. And that is quite problematic, because now we are not coming from an Islamic perspective. We are coming from other people's perspective with other agendas and other philosophies. It's very important that when we talk aqli, we talk Islamic and not secular. And it's also very important when we talk naqli that we talk in terms of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ first and foremost. Oftentimes, we mean by naqli al-fiqhi, and we mean by naqli to copy from the books of fiqh. And the books of fiqh, yes, they do answer the questions of ibadat. I studied the fiqh al-Shafi'iyya when I was a kid, so I do wudu and salah and hajj and umrah according to the Shafi'iyya fiqh. But I cannot really, when I think about psychology, I cannot think Shafi'i. There is no psychology in fiqh al-Shafi'iyya. There is no politics in fiqh al-Shafi'iyya, unless you talk about the Juwayni and the Mawardi, and these people talk about a different state and different society and different government. You cannot build politics today on al-Mawardi. Al-Mawardi is talking about the Khalifa. We don't have a Khalifa anymore. We wish we would, but we don't, you see. So how can we build fiqh siyasa shar'iyya today? We cannot go back to a Shafi'iyya. And how can we deal with medicine today? We cannot really seriously go back to Razi and Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd for medicine today, because medicine today is different. And it doesn't mean to go secular. It doesn't mean to define the human in a chemical way or a genetic way. That is a problem with the current mainstream, which is usually Western. The current methodology defines the human as parts, spare parts, your car, and something happens with the motor, you remove the motor, you put another motor, and the car works. They think about the human this way. In Islam, the human is not like that. The human is jasad wa nafs wa ruh. We have a body and a soul and a spirit. We have something called al-qalb that is in the chest, Allah said, but al-qalb is not just the muscle. Al-qalb is different. Al-qalb has so many things. And this is not a metaphor. This is the reality in Islam. So al-aqli cannot be secular, and the naqli cannot be just fiqhi. That is not enough for a naqli. How do we do naqli? How do we think in terms of Islam? We go back to the Book of Allah. When we go back to the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we need to do what is called here cycles of reflection. In that humble book of mine, you will find several hundred pages on this, but I'm going to give a very quick summary so we can have a quick discussion, inshallah. When we go to the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we should look for certain elements of worldview, certain elements of conceptualization, what we call in Arabic at-tasawwur. We say in the fiqh, in the old fiqhi maxim, it says, al-hukmu ala shay'i far'un an tasawwurihi. You cannot judge something until you perceive it, until you conceptualize it. We cannot conceptualize reading the Quran through the books of tafsir, the old books, I mean, because the old books of tafsir, as I mentioned, talk about a different state and a different economy and a different society and a different human. Yes, there is a fixed part of Islam, the ibadat and the other issues that are fixed. We can talk about that. But I'm talking about the 90% of life that is not fixed, that is changeable, that has to do with civilization, exactly as it is in the title of that center. So when you look at the Quran and the Sunnah, we have to look at a number of elements. And you find, as I mentioned, many details in that book. We have to look at the objectives. When you read the Quran, look for the objectives of the Quran, the whys of the Quran. Why are we here? وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I have not created jinn and ins except for worshiping me. So the higher objective is to worship Allah. Under that, we have to do what is called islahul ard. We have to reform earth or better earth. That betterment, that rectification, how is it? And what does it mean? And what is the opposite of it in terms of objectives? Al-islah, there is al-ifsad or corruption. How can we be reformers and not corruptors? How can we be muhsinun, excellent people, and not mischievous people? The objectives here are set by the Book of Allah. And once you have your objectives set, you can set the objectives of your life, of your organization, of your society, of your state, of a program that you have, of a speech that you give. You have to have objectives. You have to set your purpose. And that is very important, because sometimes in research, we define the problem and we don't set the purpose. But purpose definition is more important than problem definition, because problem definition could be misdefined if you start with the wrong framework. I am defining a problem that doesn't exist. And I see this a lot. I supervise research and researchers from around the world. I'm honored that they take my opinion. And sometimes I find that the research is wrong from the start. Why? Because the question is wrong. The problem definition is wrong. The researcher doesn't have a purpose, doesn't have a maqsad. The researcher is defining a problem. What is your problem? My problem is patriarchy in a society. But what is patriarchy in the Quranic concepts? We don't have this concept. My problem is the development of the nation. How do you define development from an Islamic perspective? Because there are many definitions of development. If you define development according to, I don't know, the World Bank or the UN or any of the international organizations, then you are not defining development from an Islamic point of view. Then you are serving some other people's agenda and not the Islamic agenda. So as an Islamic university or as an Islamic movement or as an Islamic people, we have to be aware of the differences between our definitions of things and other people's definitions. When you define your problem as economic freedom or any of the other freedoms that people talk about, they talk about gender freedom these days. When you define this as a problem, then how do you do Islamic research? This is not Islamic, because from the beginning, you have the wrong problem definition. You should have a purpose. You should have an objective. What is my objective? It is has to be an Islamic objective. So if we talk economics, an Islamic objective is the eradication of poverty. And eradication of poverty is different from development, because so many nations are developed, but there's so much poverty. And development, if you define it in economic terms, in terms of the GDP and so on, many of the Arab nations, I happen to come from Arabia originally, many of the Arab nations have the highest GDPs in the world, but people are begging in the street. And the youth are selling their kidneys and their blood and their skin in the street because they cannot afford education and they cannot afford food. And this is in the heart of the land of Islam. Why? Because the GDP is high, but poverty is higher than the GDP. Islam does not say GDP. Islam says poverty and the eradication of poverty. When you talk about economic freedom, no, you have to put that aside and critique it and have your objective as combating monopoly, al-ihtikar, al-muhtakiru khati. We have something called monopoly in Islam, ihtikar or oligopoly, كي لا يكون دولة بين الأغنياء منكم, so that the rich do not circulate the money. We have that. We have the objectives in the Quran. And we have to take the objective from the Quran and make the research serve the objective of the Quran and not the objective of an organization that is working for an interest of a state or a company or a certain group of people, which is fine. People work for their interests in this world. But as Muslims, we have to work for our interests too. And our interests, if you're going to talk about maqasid and the objectives, is at least حفظ الدين والنفس والعقل والمال. We at least have to protect lives and have to protect people's dignity and honor. And we have to allow people to have basic lives and so forth. So this is not economic development. That is different. When we talk about education, so what are the standards of education? I taught, as my brother mentioned, in East Asia for some time, and I see that the standard of education is not really Islamic. There are some Islamic standards that we have in some of the universities and so on. But when we talk standards of education, we are talking about criteria that does not achieve the objective of Islamic education. And therefore, to summarize, objective is more important than problem definition. And problem definition should have an Islamic framework in order for us to be able to achieve that. Now, purpose should be our first step. What is my purpose from studying Islamic civilization? How do I define civilization? What is the rise and fall? And so forth. And then when I read the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, I should be aiming to build this framework. Now, concepts are very important because in Islam, we have words in the Quran. And the words in the Quran have what the Quran calls sultan. Sultan is authority. ما أنزل الله بها من سلطان. الزواج, or النكاح. This is a word in the Quran. That marriage is a concept, is an Islamic concept. Marriage is not a legal concept in Islam. Yes, it becomes from an Islamic concept and it becomes law, and the government takes care of certain regulations. But marriage is not defined by the law. Marriage is defined by Allah. I live in Canada here, and marriage is the consent of any two things or any two people or any, this is not an Islamic definition. And therefore, it's important to differentiate between the Islamic definition of marriage and other people's definition, az-zawaj, at-talaq, and so forth, everything that comes with that area. When we talk about al-ilm, I mentioned that knowledge is not equal to law. Knowledge is comprehensive. When we talk about al-hukm or governance, this is not necessarily in the way a modern democracy works. Modern democracies have their pros and have their cons. And as Muslims, we have to know that democracy has some positive side and has negative side. And al-hikmatu dalatul mu'min, the wisdom is the lost good of the believer. We should take the best of democracy, not the worst of democracy. But I noticed that, especially sometimes Muslim organizations, or we take the worst of democracy. We do the lobbying and the corruption and the forging of elections. We do that, but we don't take the best part of democracy, which is the peaceful alternation of power. And democracy is about giving people a say, and democracy is about critiquing of the previous government. Like democracy, you see positive side. But we only do the negative side as Muslims, and we don't focus on the positive side of democracy. Since we're talking political science, nation states, why do we have nation states? Westphalia and so on, and then the colonization made their tricks, and long history anyway. But we should take the best of the nation state, not the worst of the nation state. But if you look at the Arab world, again, for example, you find the worst of the nation state, fighting over the borders, taking away people's citizenship from them. You will find all the problems of the nation state. But why do we have nation state? So that the government, what is the maqsid? So that the government runs the affairs of the people for the best interest of the people, for the ummah, for the nations. So that if you have a nation in Indonesia, the government is taking care of your affairs. This is how we can study politics, let's say, from an Islamic perspective. When we look at the Islamic civilization, we should also look at the states not in one color or one standard, because some of the governments in our history was excellent and was Khilafah Rashida. People succeeded the Prophet ﷺ in the best way. And some of the governments in our Islamic history were corrupt. And some of the princes were excellent. And some of the princes were murderers and thieves. And therefore, we have to look at our history and our civilization in terms of the state in a balanced way. And civilization is not just a state, but we have a problem with writing our Islamic history is that it's too political and too military. Our Islamic history has to be wider than the politics and the military. Our scientific history is important. The history of science in Islam is a great history, much better than the political history, but we don't study science in the history as much. The history of trade and innovation and roads and all sorts, the trade technology, if you wish, in Islam has a great history. The history of institutions like hospitals, like markets, like libraries. If you look at the history of the awqaf or the endowments in Islam, how the libraries were designed, how the research centers, Bayt al-Hikmah in Baghdad, and other research centers, how they were designed, how the libraries were designed. That is part of our civilization. So when we talk about Islamic civilization, we should not only talk about military conquests and kings and queens, not only that, but we should also look at the society, the history of the society. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he talks about history in the Quran, he does talk about military wars and peace sometimes, but he talks about faith and disbelief. He talks about al-iman wal-kufr. He talks about people, not necessarily about the archaeology and so forth. History has a different definition in Islam. In fact, the Quran doesn't mention dates and doesn't give chronology. It talks about history in terms of the basically lessons we can learn. When we look at back to this 7-element conceptual framework, and again, as I advise, my brother mentioned that he will send the book to the participants. In this book, you will find a couple hundred pages on that. You classify groups. What are the groups in the Quran? From page 1, صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Then ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين المتقون المصلحون الصادقون العابدون. Then you talk about al-ulama. You're talking about groups, certain groups. And these groups have to be our criteria of understanding groups in the reality. Because we live in a world where groups in the reality are not the groups of the Quran. We don't have mu'minun and kuffar and munafiqun anymore. We don't have muslihun and mufsidun anymore. We have celebrities and business people and diplomats and terrorists and officials, and this is fine, but we have to define amongst these groups that we're talking about, from the diplomats, who is muslihun and who is mufsidun, who are the corruptors and who are the reformers, amongst the what some governments call terrorists, who are the people who fight for their countries, even if they call them terrorists, and those who are really terrorists, who are killing innocent people and so on. We have to have our definition of groups, our definition of what is good and what is bad. And I am repeating that because if we lose the definition, if we lose defining things, then we lose the battle. And that is a major problem that we are facing using these research centers and universities like your honorable university. Education is very important. The Ummah does not have a problem with resources. We are one of the richest, or we are the richest Ummah in the world. The Muslim Ummah, if you take people from the Atlantic to the Pacific from the other side, this is the richest part of the world. The richest in terms of people, in terms of mines, in terms of gold and silver and oil and trees and deserts and fish and everything. We are the richest people. But our defeat is because of the defeat in the realm of ideas. In education, we lost the education battle. And because we lost the education battle, we lost the battle as an ummah, and we are basically followers of others who have less resources, but they have the definition. They define things. They define for us what is freedom and what is not, and what is good and what is evil, and what is supposed to be a popular thing to discuss and what is not. And they define for us whom to be happy about and whom to be sad about. And that is wrong. So when we go back to the conceptual framework, we have to define objectives, concepts, and groups. We have to define universal laws, and we have to define the values and the commands and so forth. I wouldn't have time to go through this. But basically, one point here I want to mention is that when we reflect upon the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, we have to give care to the Arabic language because it is the language of that book. Arabic, I am actually recommending for my brothers and sisters to learn Arabic. When I immigrated to this country, Canada, 30 years ago, I did not speak English and I did not speak French. And then I learned English. I speak to you in English now. And I learned French. I spoke French a little while. So my point is, you can learn a language, but you have to have the intent. You have to really put an effort. I put effort for years, writing every word in English and reading and memorizing, and until I learned the language. Arabic is a very easy language, a very systematic language. And it has a lot of intersection with the Bahasa, by the way. Bahasa Indonesia, Bahasa Malaysia, all of the Bahasa has a lot of intersection with the Arabic. When I hear you speaking in Bahasa Indonesia, I understand 50% of what you say because this is Arabic. This, you know, and so do I understand Urdu and Turkish and Swahili and every language that is an Islamic language. But the problem is that we have a battle between Bahasa Indonesia English and Bahasa Indonesia Arabic. And I have seen it between the Bahasa Malaysia English and the Bahasa Malaysia Arabic. And we lost the script into the English script, and therefore we lost lots of sounds and lots of words. And now we are not supposed to lose the vocabulary. And I've seen the same battle with the Turkish and the Kurdish and the Urdu, you name it, languages that people spoke in the languages of Southern Europe. When you hear Sicilian, this is Arabic. When you hear Maltian or Andalusian, the old Andalusian, that is now an extinct language, this is Arabic. So my point is that language is not a luxury. Language is at the heart of what you do. At least if you are going to use the national language, at least maintain the Islamic feature of the Bahasa Indonesia, and don't lose the Bahasa Indonesia to English Indonesia. That is different. Arabs do the same thing. You sit in Cairo or you sit in Doha or Dubai, and you hear Arabs speaking, and half of what they speak is Arabic, and the other half is English or French. You sit in Morocco or Algeria or Mauritania, and then you hear French more than Arabic. And this is a battle that we have to fight because language is very important. And that's why when the French occupied West Africa, when they occupied West Africa, they started by killing the Arabic teachers. Before the fiqh scholars and before they killed the movements that were against the French occupation, they killed hundreds of Arabic teachers in every city. And you can read that in the French history from the French books, even not from any conspiracy theory or anything. Why? Because they knew that if Nigerians speak Arabic, they are not going to be occupied. But if they speak French, and the Senegalese and the Côte d'Ivoire, now it's a French name, and this is not to isolate the Ummah, and this is not to make everybody enemy. I live in Canada, I'm speaking to you in Canada. But it's very important that we have our character as Muslims, and we contribute. I live here as a minority of Muslims but we contribute to the society. It does not mean that we don't have our identity. It does not mean that we don't have our definition of marriage, of values, what is ethical and what is not. We do not do this and we do that as Muslims. It doesn't mean that we are supposed to be part of a paradigm that is not our paradigm. So I want to skip to a point where I think quite long. I want to suggest here that we start to think about the realization of fiqh in three circles: research, education, and action. And it's very important that we rethink the classification of knowledge. Knowledge is classified, as you know, in humanities, social sciences, natural sciences, applied sciences. But even today's West is going beyond that now. We have something called multidisciplinary studies. In Islam, we need to go beyond multidisciplinary. We have to do transdisciplinary, not just combining two disciplines, but going beyond disciplines, not assuming that every discipline has its own epistemology, because that's not an Islamic idea. In Islam, there is one epistemology. There is al-ilm, and there is the usul. The usul are the foundation of knowledge. That is one for every knowledge, whether you're talking about psychology or you're talking about law, whether you are doing biology or you're doing computer science. Every knowledge has a basis in Islam. So my point is that we go beyond the disciplines so that we don't lose this battle, and we go beyond the Islamic disciplines. See, we have to be critical on two fronts. We have to be critical to the Islamic literature, and we have to be critical to the non-Islamic literature. Why should we be critical to the Islamic literature? Of course, the Quran and Sunnah are not literature. I'm talking about the human-made thought, and the tafsir, and the falsafa, and the tarikh, and the hadith, and the fiqh. This is human-made. These are people narrating. These are people saying a certain rule of fiqh, finance, psychology, and so on. When we do this from the Islamic point of view, we have to go beyond the history of fiqh and think in terms of these four classifications of contemporary Islamic studies, which I would love to give another lecture about. The usuli studies, what we mean by that, the disciplinary studies, phenomena studies, and strategic studies. So when we do disciplinary studies within the Islamic studies, our goal is to reconstruct, to reorient, to re-envision, to rebuild disciplines. We have to rebuild economics. We cannot take economics from the usual textbooks because that's not Islamic. And we have to rebuild our political science. And we have to rebuild every knowledge, even the natural sciences. Are we going to rebuild physics and chemistry and so on? Yes, not necessarily in the lab itself, but the purpose of the lab. Why are we studying genetics, for example? The purpose is very important. The values, the value system. So when it comes even to natural sciences, we have to redefine and rebuild and rethink, because otherwise we are going to lose this battle and we are going to be serving other agendas. When we talk about phenomena here, this is very important. We start to look at phenomena with Islamic eyes. As I mentioned, don't look at development, look at poverty. Don't look at economic freedom, look at the lack of monopoly. Don't look at social freedoms or gender definition, and look at family. Don't look at the modern architecture in terms of city efficiency and so on, and look at that in terms of the Islamic architecture, not necessarily the historical architecture, but the way we build cities in order for us to have an Islamic life, because our cities should be different. We have cities now that are neither based on the Islamic model nor based on French modernism, because they are copied from French modernism, but this is not France. If you're talking about Jakarta or Cairo or any of our cities in the Muslim world. I want to stop here to give time for Q&A. I just gave some thoughts. And as I mentioned, I wrote a few hundred pages, on that in that humble book. And I gave that to Brother Rafiq. I am repeating my thanks to all of you for being here. It's a bit late my time, so forgive me if I'm a bit sleepy. I usually sleep early, but I stayed late because I was keen to meet all of you until we meet, inshallah, in Jogja. Makasih again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Sheikh Professor Jasir Auda, for your very wonderful talk and presentation. And again, we are so sorry to take your rest time, bedtime. I know it's struggling for you, but thank you for being with us to enlighten us. And then, as you mentioned, I have uploaded the book, PDF version of your book in the chat box. So please please check your chat box. It's been there. And then please prepare your question in the here as well. You might mute yourself. You can talk directly, or you can write it. It could be in Bahasa, in Arabic, or in English. But please give me some time to translate or summarize the point. I was asked by few participants to summarize the idea, and I mean hopefully I can do it very short. Pertama, Pak Jasir Auda menjelaskan tentang pentingnya konsep interkonektivitas, keterhubungan segala sesuatu, dan pentingnya konsep tujuan. Jadi tidak cukup hanya berpikir segala sesuatu itu terkait, tetapi juga segala sesuatu itu dimulai dari tujuan. Kemudian beliau menjelaskan ada beberapa konsep-konsep pokok yang kita definisikan terlalu sempit. Padahal kalau kita cek Al-Quran, Wahyu, dan basis pertama kita dari firman Allah, pemahamannya bisa sebenarnya luas. Misalnya konsep fikih itu bukan hanya hukum Islam, tapi pemahaman lebih luas. Ijtihad itu bukan hanya masalah hukum Islam, tapi pemikiran keislaman lebih luas. Konsep din diantaranya juga yang beliau klarifikasi dan ingin perluas maknanya. Kembalikan ke makna asal. Kemudian tadi significant portion dijelaskan mengenai apa saja aspek-aspek yang harus kita lihat, elemen-elemen yang harus kita lihat ketika kita membaca Al-Quran. Pertama dan yang paling penting adalah pertanyaan mengenai mengapa atau pertanyaan mengenai tujuan. Nah, dan ini punya implikasi dalam aktivitas kita sebagai ilmuwan. Riset itu tidak dimulai dari pertanyaan riset, tidak dimulai dari rumusan pertanyaan, tapi dimulai dari tujuan. Nah, ini yang sering sekali kita abaikan. Kenapa kita melakukan riset? Dan pertanyaan mengapa itu atau pertanyaan mengenai tujuan akan menentukan definisi-definisi konsep kita. Kita harus menentukan kriteria apa yang kita gunakan dalam riset kita. Dan tadi sangat ditekankan jangan sampai salah kriteria menggunakan kriteria sekuler barat, bukan kriteria yang bersifat Islamik. Misalnya contohnya konsep development atau perkembangan ekonomi itu konsep barat, dan itu konsep baru berbeda dengan konsep yang Islami mengenai eradication of poverty atau penghapusan kemiskinan. Nah, jadi kita harus berpijak dari konsep-konsep yang Islami. Kemudian juga kita ketika membaca Al-Quran lihat definisi-definisi, misalnya konsep nikah itu bukan sekedar terma biasa, terma yang trivial, konsep sultoh atau otoritas, tapi ada kandungan maknanya. Ada kandungan Islaminya yang berasal dari Al-Quran. Jadi we have to make sure everything itu berasal dari konsep-konsep Al-Quran. Juga lihat dalam Al-Quran universal laws atau hukum-hukum Allah, sunan-sunan ilahiyah, sunnah ilahiyah. Kemudian juga ditekankan tentang pentingnya bahasa Arab. Kita semua perlu belajar bahasa Arab, walaupun juga mungkin sudah usianya sudah tidak muda lagi, karena bahasa Arab itu adalah bahasa keilmuan Islam. Dan saya perlu garis bawahi, beliau tadi bilang jangan sampai pengaruh bahasa Arab hilang dari bahasa Indonesia, karena ada kompetisi untuk mempengaruhi bahasa Indonesia kita hari ini antara budaya populer, bahasa Inggris, bahasa-bahasa asing, mungkin juga termasuk Korea, dan itu bisa mengikis peran bahasa Arab di dalamnya. Nah, kita harus mempertahankan ada pengaruh bahasa Arab di dalam bahasa keseharian kita. Kemudian tadi juga dijelaskan tentang perlunya dalam integrasi keilmuan kita mengkritik. Satu, mengkritik pemikiran Islam, pemikiran sekuler Barat. Jadi kalau kita baca buku-buku Barat harus dipastikan bahwa dia sejalan dengan pandangan dunia Islam. kedua, bukan hanya itu, kita juga mengkritik sejarah kita sendiri atau pemikiran keislaman. Dan untuk mengkritik pemahaman keislaman, pemikiran keislaman, kita harus menempatkan Al-Quran sebagai standar dan sebagai tolak ukur. I'm sorry for taking so much time to summarize your ideas. I hope I do it in a proper manner. Now, we have 4 persons who have raised the hand. I will let them speak, but please speak briefly to the point. What is your question? You don't have to, talk in a longer manner. What is the point? What is your questions? We start from Brother Jelang Ramadan. He is now a PhD student in Turkey. Please write to your questions.
Okay, thank you so much, my Kanda, Mas Rafiq. It's been a while to see you. It's very nice. Assalamualaikum. Assalamualaikum. Sheikh Yasser. Hopefully, I really have a really nice explanation from you, and I would like to ask you at least 2 questions.
I allow you only 1 question, please.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's hard to choose actually. Okay, I will choose the second one. This is for actually I'm taking international relation department for my doctoral degree. I would like to ask you regarding how we construct or reconstruct the revelation base or revelation for purpose research regarding the disciplinary in terms of trans, multi, or inter in international relations, because sometimes if we put the revelation on our research, even in the international relation, they always refer our study to the religious one. In example, if I take the Surah Al-Hujurah verse 13 regarding how people contact and how nations behave to each other, we put the ayat to the religious, and then they automatically refer our study to the religious one, even though that's the international relations study. And I experienced, I think, from 20 years ago that a religion in the international relations study always remain at the periphery of the international relations study. That's why how we construct and reconstruct this kind of research, and I would like to hear from you the enlightenment. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Barakallahu feekum. Barakallahu
Thank you. Sheikh Jasir, if you don't mind, we want to combine a couple of questions. So because we have the issue of time, so we'll take 1 more questions from the audience, direct questions. Then we can give the time for you to give an answer. Now, Pak Arif Rahman, please briefly strike forward to your questions.
Okay. Assalamualaikum, Professor Yasir. My name is Muhammad Arif Rahman. I'm now teaching in English department at Gajah Mada University. I used to be an education attaché in Indonesian Embassy in London. But as I often deal with so-called like more empirical based knowledge, like Western is more empirical. My question is there such a thing as so-called like metaphysical paradigm in Islam? For instance, like to understand the phenomena like Khidir, and then ayah, something like Law anzalna hadal Qur'ana ala jabali ra'aitahu khashi'an, etc. Because it's probably like in Indonesia, we still have some so-called empirical knowledge, but we also have some other things like like a saman, possessions, things like that. I think that's it. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Pak Arif Rahman. I think he's referring to mystical instead of metaphysical, I think.
Yeah, sure. No,
yeah, your time, Professor Jasir, you have 2 questions.
Barakallahu feek. For my brother Ramadan, my advice is that you finish your PhD and finish your studies. Do what the university is asking you to do. It is very difficult in a secular system. And I have this question here in Canada all the time from Muslim students. And I was in Turkey last month. I got this question several times from Muslim students in Turkish universities. Because the system is secular, it does not allow you to mix disciplines. It does not allow you to bring Islamic ideas to political science or to even sociology or anthropology. So my advice is that you finish your PhD and do your work as the university is asking you to do, but consider your PhD to be a training only, not really building the knowledge. It's just a training for you to learn, to do your literature and to present presentations and so on. Do not say anything wrong, obviously, just be ethical. Just be ethical. But you really cannot be Islamic in a secular system. I used to teach here in the university. I mean, now in Canada, I don't anymore because of my political views. But when I used to teach in university here, I basically could not take the students to the Quran as a fact, as a reality. So I'm speaking Quranic studies, but in terms of tafsir science and so on, but not the Quran as truth, because I am in a secular system. It doesn't work. So my advice, finish your studies, but parallel to that, I advise you to take an Islamic approach. There is a number of institutions in Turkey that take an Islamic approach. We're opening a branch soon, inshallah, in Turkey as Maqasid Institute. But you have the likes of IDIB and ILM and so forth. So subscribe to some of those so that you have an Islamic approach as well to integrate. As my brother Arif al-Rahman, Ustad Arif al-Rahman, actually Islam does not have a metaphysical paradigm, because everything in Islam is physics, but some of it is ghaib and some of it is shahada. Shahada is what you call empirical. So basically in Islam, we believe in this. In fact, we are the ones in the Islamic civilization who created the empirical research. But also we believe in al-ghaib. Al-ghaib is something that exists, it's physics, but we don't know where and how. So angels and jinn and Jannah and Nar and so forth, this is physics to us. It's not metaphysics. It's not beyond the reality. It is reality, but we don't comprehend it, because in Islam, we look at ourselves as limited. We are limited. We can see limited colors. We cannot see under the red or beyond the violet. And angels could be maybe beyond the violet. We cannot really see them. You mentioned two examples that are different though. One is Al-Khidr. And Al-Khidr is, if you're talking about the Quran, the story is confirmed. The story of Sayyidina Musa, and the person who is known in our culture to be Al-Khidr. But the Quran is not saying Al-Khidr. Quran is saying Abda min ibadina. There is a hadith that says that he is Al-Khidr, but it's disputed. So when the hadith is disputed, that is not confirmed knowledge. It is not, we don't have that as confirmed knowledge. These are hadith that are disputed amongst the scholars of hadith. And therefore, we don't know whether Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned Al-Khidr like that or not. My take on it is that he did not mention it, because when the Quran does not mention something, Muhammad doesn't mention it. But when it's mentioned in the hadith, it's usually what's called Israeliyat, or the people of the book, putting the names of, the names of Ashab al-Kahf, and the names of the people of the children of Asbat, and the names of the Hawariyin, and the names, Muhammad didn't say any of that. So I don't think that Al-Khidr is a reality other than the Quran. The Quran is talking about him or about Al-Abd al-Salih, that is fine. When you talk about لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل, that's different. That means that mountains have a character in Islam. And that is, yes, a different concept from geology. Geology do not believe that mountains have personalities or rocks fear Allah, or the water is alive. They don't believe in that. They just think that water is H2O and the mountain is made of iron and silver and gold, and it's not made of consciousness, or what's called al-wa'i in Arabic. And actually, this is wrong, because in Islam, we believe that matter is alive, but in a different way. Not necessarily they speak like us or they have societies. Mountains are not going to get married and have children like us. It's not like that, but it is a life. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given the amana to the mountain, and عرضنا الأمانة على السماوات والأرض والجبال, so he said that he asked the mountain, do you want to carry the amana, carry the trust? And the mountain said no. And had he revealed the Quran to the mountain would have felt it. So that is different, because we believe that matter is alive and is conscious and has memory and everything. Allahu Akbar.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. Thank you very much, Chef Yasir.
Shukran.
And we are very sad to hear that you no longer teach in the university. Well,
No, I'm happy with that. I'm very happy with that.
it's
Yeah,
called liberalism of liberalism.
Yeah, I am just doing my Islamic work. That's it. Alhamdulillah.
a contradiction. People are calling themselves liberal. They want to hear everything, but accept religious values and Islamic values. That is totally, I don't know how to call it, hypocrite or something. But we'll make best dua.
Yeah, you speak with Palestine, and that's the end of your career, and that's good. That's an honor for me. It's an honor for me.
But we have to stick with our commitment, with our vision. That's
Alhamdulillah.
I admire you what you are doing now.
Of course, alhamdulillah.
Mashallah. And then we now turn to questions from the chat box. I will read several questions.
Sure.
The question this is from Shaf Wendy. The question that I would like to ask is, when we talk about Islamic economic, in what area we should depart from? Should we define the purpose of doing economic in Islamic point of view, or we need to define the role and function of human being first to know how Islamic economic works? You get the point, right?
Yeah.
Now, let me read the second questions. From Professor Emi, I think she's a lecturer here in Jogja. Dear Professor Jasir, I need to facilitate a class on sociology and anthropology of Muslim society. Current resources are rare. To help me run the class from Islamic perspective, what is your suggestions? Sociology and anthropology of Muslim society. Now, let's turn to from Brother Mukhlis, Sheikh Mukhlis Rahmanto from Malaysia, but he's a lecturer in our university. The questions relates to one of the elements of the conceptual framework that you offer, correcting concepts. So my questions is, what is your view on classifying Islamic concept into ibadah and muamalah, theology and ethics? Is there any need to build from this classification? Okay. And then,
first of all, the first question about the iqtisad or the economics. I think we should work in parallel lines. I think one of the lines could be what is called Islamic finances these days, which is basically trying to avoid some of the riba in the capitalist system. Some of it, not everything. Try to avoid some of it. Try to give some Muslims halal ways of doing business. At least they should not buy and sell something haram. At least there should not be usury. That is the clear one. Of course, there are other forms of usury in the banknote itself. But anyway, I mean, so at least one parallel line is to be doing the Islamic finance part. The other line is what you mentioned, Akhi, which is the reconstruction of the economy. What are the bases of economics in Islam? There are three bases in Islam. One is al-awqaf, or the endowments. Second is the zakah. And third is al-bay'. Al-awqaf, or the endowments, cover all the public affairs, health, services and education and research and libraries and animals and feeding the hungry and shelters and water and you name it. Awqaf is basically the majority of the economic activity in an economic system that is Islamic. If you want to say I have an economic system that's Islamic, your basic services have to be awqaf. They cannot be the central bank, they cannot be companies. This is not Islamic. And especially education and health and so forth. Secondly, the zakah should be collected by the government and distributed according to the fiqh of the zakah that is well known. Thirdly, al-bay', and al-bay' is different from trading in money that we have today. That is actually pretty much riba in most of its transactions. Al-bay' is to use money that has value, not money that does not mean anything. You see, the paper money, and I know this is the current system, and we are dealing with it. I mentioned we should do Islamic financing, but the paper money is not Islamic because it does not have value. And since 1971, it does not even have any link with gold. You know, when the Americans cut the ties between the fiat money and gold, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a piece of paper that is enforced, and every time is used, it loses part of its value. The depreciation, the dollar, for example, I live in North America here, the dollar lost 94% of its value over the past 100 years, which means that what you could buy 100 years ago with $4, now we need $100 to buy. And what you could buy with, you see, anyway. So my point is, there is one parallel line that deals with Islamic finances, and the other parallel line is trying to bring new and fresh ideas to economics. The idea of endowments or foundations, to expand on that, the idea of trying to link our currencies with reality. I know it's very difficult because the international economic system is not going to allow us to do that, but at least if countries start to try, and Indonesia, by the way, is one of the, is actually, to my knowledge, the only country that tried not to participate in the international system, but then history, the rest is history anyway. So my point is that if you could try to change the way money is dealt with so that it has value and it does not depreciate and take from the dollar in people's hands or the rupee in people's hands, and then the rupee becomes $1 and then the rupee becomes $1 over $10,000, that is quite a problem. So that is about the economics. Prof, I mean, I'm honored that you're here, sir. Barakallahu feekum. And I don't see you on my screen. CD, sociology and anthropology, the work that the International Institute of Islamic Thought did during the time of the Islamization of knowledge, during the time of Dr. Farouqi, rahimahullah. They have a book on Islamic anthropology that is not bad. Of course, I would refer you to what Dr. Muna Abul Fadl of IIIT wrote on these issues, on issues of sociology and anthropology. She did a very good job. I would refer you to Prof. Ismail Farouqi, obviously, in his Atlas of the Islamic world, and his wife, rahimahullah, Lamia al-Farouqi, and what they wrote about anthropology from an Islamic perspective is actually very good. The ideas of Dr. Muna, and again, her husband, Dr. Taha al-Alwani, our Ustad, rahimahullah. So basically, I would refer you to the International Institute of Islamic Thought during the time when they were doing Islamic thought anyway, of that particular kind. About the concepts, yes, al-ibadat and mu'amalat is not really a Quranic division. Al-ibadah in Islam is everything. It's not just salah and zakah and hajj. I prefer to call them al-sha'air, not al-ibadat, because ibadat includes mu'amalat, zawaj and talaq and qada and jihad, and all of that is ibadat too. But sha'air, ذلك ومن يعظم شعائر الله. Allah mentioned subhanahu wa ta'ala about the hajj, for example, sha'air. So sha'air is what you can say in English, rituals. This is the ibadat. And yes, there is sha'air in the family law, and there is sha'air in the zakah. There are some sha'air in the mu'amalat, like the prohibition of riba and the prohibition of zina, Allah forbid. And these things, these are sha'air. And the others should not be called mu'amalat, should be called sciences, like economics and medicine and whatever. Like we should not have Islamic muamalat and non-Islamic muamalat, because Islam doesn't divide that. Islam does not have Islamic economics. Islam has economics, that's it, or anthropology or sociology. And then you are Muslim, you come from an Islamic point of view. So that's my suggestion. Allah.
All right. Thank you very much, Sheikh Jasir. Since we start 10 minutes late, are you okay if we,
Yes,
finish at
inshallah.
like 10 according to Indonesian time? So
No
we
problem.
have 15 more minutes. So we
Sure.
come back to direct questions, direct participation. So I invite Pak Hadi Ifan and Pak Dr. Muhammad Naim Majid to ask the questions. We also have here Professor Habib Hezin, just in case he wants to say salam and to have a brief comment about our session.
MashaAllah.
For Pak Hanifan and Pak Muhammad Naim, please say what you want to say in a succinct manner.
terima kasih banyak. أنا سأتحدث بالعربية.
أهلا.
تفضل.
يا أهلا يا شيخ ياسر، هذا لي يعني كرم أن أتحدث معكم. هناك كلام الذي سأسأل إليك، يعني قيل أن من يدرس الإسلام وهم ليس من المسلمين هؤلاء أفضل ممن يدرس وهم الدارسين من المسلمين، لأن هؤلاء الذين ليسوا من المسلمين لهم النظر، يعني نظر عدل في نوعا ما، ليس لهم الميل يعني objective مثلا، والمسلمون لو يدرسون لهم يعني الميل نوعا ما من الميل، يعني لم ينظر بنظر العدل. كيف رأيكم في هذه الكلام؟ يعني شكرا يا شيخ.
السؤال الثاني من دكتور محمد ناعم. تفضل دكتور.
تفضل.
هل أنت ما زلت هناك؟
نعم. Okay, شكرا. Okay, thank you for this good opportunity. In the linguistic studies أو في مجال اللغة العربية هناك يعني التنص، يعني نسميها التنص، دراسة التنص يعني intertextuality, for example in the Holy Quran. So the question is how to do and make sure the intertextuality study in the Holy Quran can give this influence to the integrative science until to create the holistic integrative. And this one is jadi هذا التناص مثلا يعني نحاول أن ننظر في تفسير الآية القرآن مثلا من آية إلى آية أخرى، ولكن كيف هذا التنص يمكن نخلق أيضا فكرة تكاملية يعني مع العلوم الإنسانية إن شاء الله.
شكرا دكتور ناعم. Now we turn to give us we give a couple of minutes to Dr. Habib Khirzin, our senior in Muhammadiyah, to let him say a few things.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
أهلا.
هذا شرف عظيم لنا يا دكتور. الحمد لله.
مولانا الشرف لنا.
الله يكرمكم. الله يكرمكم. الحمد لله. It's indeed a great pleasure to see you again in this panel, and I would like to congratulate to brothers and sisters in the CISIC, Center for Integrative Studies and Civilization of the University of Muhammadiyah. I used to be a lecturer in the first, during the initial steps of University of Muhammadiyah in 1983 and 84, before I moved to Jakarta in 85. And I'm interested in your lecture, the very comprehensive lecture on the Islamic worldview and the need to what you call in this paradigm in the conceptual framework, and also in the what you call this disciplinary approach, and in the last studies the need for the purpose on the phenomenal studies, because like in the studies of peace and development, even between the World Bank and the UNDP, they have different definitions. Yeah, I wrote in 1980, yeah, when the UNDP started to develop the Human Development Index, and then they came to Human Security Index in 94, and the World Bank still because they are bank, yeah, because they are bank, yeah, there's a profit making, they're bank, yeah.
Private bank.
Yeah, so I fully agree with your kind wise, and I would to suggest our brothers in CISIC, led by Brother Rafiq Zakir and some brothers, to follow these steps. Yeah, I really, the Islamization or integrative studies is very important in the to reform the civilization, because Muhammadiyah itself has started with the Al-Ma'un, with the Yamna'un al-Ma'un. It's a very basic concepts, yeah, of development, actually, even in economy. Yamna'un al-Ma'un, because the if Sha'us Salam wa Id'amut Ta'am is very, very basic. So thank you, brother Dr. Jazir. Please keep advise us, especially with CISIC. I still keep in touch with brother Zaid Barzanji in Washington DC, and some brothers in Turkey, in also in London. So thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله. بارك الله فيكم دكتور حبيب. بارك الله فيكم. And of course I'm more than happy and honored inshallah to be part of that any initiative you would like. To answer the questions, السؤال الأول الذي يتعلق بقضية الموضوعية مولانا. الموضوعية ليست مفهوما إسلاميا، وإنما الموضوعية دائما تقابل الشخصنة، وقضية الموضوعية والشخصنة هذه ثنائية فلسفيا لا تلزم التصور الإسلامي، وإنما التصور الإسلامي لكل حكم على أمر علاقة بطبيعة المسألة وأيضا بطبيعة الرائي أو الناظر إليها. فليس هناك شخصنة ثابتة ومنفصلة عن الموضوعية، وليس هناك موضوعية منفصلة عن الشخصنة، وهذه ثنائية لا تلزم. وإنما لابد أن نعتبر أن التصور الإنساني له أساس أو أصل من العلم، وهذا ما نأخذه من القرآن، وله أصل من الواقع، وهذا ما نطبق القرآن عليه في الواقع. I will give a quick answer. My brother mentioned objectivity versus subjectivity, and I was telling him that there is nothing in Islam called objectivity or subjectivity. In Islam, every judgment of something has an objective element and subjective element, because there is no pure objectivity and there is no pure subjectivity. And when you judge something, you have to come from an Islamic framework that is not objective or subjective, that is divine, that is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You come from an Islamic framework, and then you have two dimensions. One dimension is your judgment, and that you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide you. So it is not an illusion, but it could be an illusion and you could be wrong, but you ask Allah to guide you anyway. That is one dimension. And the other dimension is the dimension of the reality of the issue that you judge. And that reality as well, it depends on how you see it. It depends on how it fits with the framework. And shura is one way of going from individualism to collectivism. It's for the reality to be confirmed when you have shura amongst Muslims. That what the fuqaha called ijma' at some point. When people have consensus, you start to have more confirmation. but objectivity and subjectivity is not really an Islamic question. Brother Muhammad Naeem, the Atanas and intertextuality and integrative sciences and holistic, this book is about that. This book is about that. I suggest that you read the humble opinions that I wrote about in terms of how to deal with the text of the Quran and building a framework and so on, and how to connect parts of the Quran. And if you have questions, I am more than happy to answer as much as I can. I'll put my email again here on the chat. And inshallah, if you have questions of research, I am more than happy to participate. And any of our brothers and sisters, researchers or professors, you have questions, you want to take my opinion on something, I'm more than happy to answer, inshallah, in due time. But I have a time that I allot to answer these questions. It's part of my duty, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Barakallah.
Shukran. Thank you, Sheikh Jasir. Before we close our discussion, nurid an nasma' kalimah or kalimatain min Rais al-PPI. Rubama yurid an yulqi syai'an ka kalimah ikhtitamiyah wa huwa ar-rajul al-azim wa ra'a hadzal barnamaj yatakallam al-arabiyya bit-talaqah. We let him convey a few messages about this program before we close. Tafadhal Sheikh Khairuddin.
طيب السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله. أهلا أهلا.
كيف حالكم يا بروفيسور ياسر عودة؟
مرحبا. أهلا 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 دكتور.
الحمد لله. والله أنا سعيد جدا في هذه الفرصة سعيدة. نتمنى لكم الصحة والعافية طبعا.
يا رب.
أتابع هذا البرنامج والمناقشات ونحن نتمتع بكل التوجيهات والإرشادات التي تعرض لنا. وطبعا الفكرة عن هذه المركز صار بفترة طويلة. نحن كنا فكرنا سنتر هذا لمدة أكثر من 8 سنوات طبعا. ونحن زرنا القاهرة مع بروفيسور شمس الأنور والتقينا في معهد جابر الواني للقرآن
الله يرحمه
في الجيزة الله يرحمه. وطبعا حسب الفكرة من الجامعة طبعا من رؤساء الجامعة نحن ما سرنا في يعني في العزم حتى يكون هذا المركز في المستقبل يعني سار في طريق صحيحة يعني
ما شاء الله
في طريقة الصحيحة. وأنا سعيد جدا لأن بروفيسور ياسر هو أول يلقي المحاضرة في هذا المركز. ونحن نتابع الكتب التي كتبتم والفكر الذي تعرض لنا. طبعا نحن عرفنا أن الشخص الثاني من الشاطبي هو الشيخ ياسر عودة في المقاصد. طبعا هذا هو مني. وأنا كما طلبت من أستاذ رفيق بعد فترة يعني قبل بعد مناقشته الدكتورة في أمريكا واتصلت وسوف يرجع إلى يوغياكرتا وإن شاء الله سيكون هو يرئيس هذا السنتر إن شاء الله. فنشكركم طبعا ونتمنى لكم طبعا على علاقة معنا وإن شاء الله في فترة قريب إن شاء الله سوف نحاول لكم حضوركم في هذه الجامعة إن شاء الله. إن شاء الله يكون نتجالس نتناقش كيف يكون هذا السنتر يكون في المستقبل يكون سنتر كما يتمنى من رؤساء محمدية ورؤساء الجامعة محمدية يوغياكارتا. وطبعا اليوم نحن أردنا للمجتمع بأن السنتر هذا سوف يحضر في المستقبل إن شاء الله. مرة ثانية شكرا لكم، وإن شاء الله سنلتقي في وقت قريب إن شاء الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام يا سيدي، يسعدني ويشرفني إن شاء الله أن نتواصل ونرتب هذا إن شاء الله. يسعدني ويشرفني، والدكتور محمد رفيق إن شاء الله أهل لذلك. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى له التوفيق، ونسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى لهذا المركز أن يوفق وأن يكون علامة على الفكر الإسلامي السليم الصحيح، وأن يؤسس لمصلحة هذه الأمة إن شاء الله ولخير الإنسانية. بارك الله فيكم وجزاكم الله خير.
Then I would like to apologize for those who raised the questions, who already type your questions in the chat box. I really apologize for not being able to read it and not being able to discuss it in here. But as Dr. Jasir mentioned, you are free to email him and to ask him and to communicate further through a different channel. But because of the time, and it's already night as well, out there in Canada, so we have to, to finish, to call it a day. And then before we do so, we ask Dr. Jasir to give a short closing remark, and then to close by reciting dua for us to lead the dua, inshallah.
Barakallahu fikum. And the remark, inshallah, is to stay in touch. And I left my email in the chat, and I left a book in Arabic and English with Dr. Muhammad Rafiq. Please take it from him. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وإسرافنا في أمرنا وثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا وأخطأنا. ربنا لا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا. ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. ربنا إننا سمعنا مناديا ينادي الإيمان أن آمنوا بربكم فآمنا. ربنا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار. ربنا وآتنا ما وعدتنا على رسلك ولا تخزنا يوم القيامة إنك لا تخلف الميعاد. اللهم زدنا علما وانفعنا بما علمتنا. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا وقلبا خاشعا ونورا ساطعا ورزقا واسعا وشفاء من كل داء وغنيمة من كل بر ونجاة من كل إثم وتوبة من كل ذنب. اللهم إنا نعوذ برضاك من سخطك ونعوذ بعفوك من عقوبتك ونعوذ بك منك لا نحصي ثناء عليك. وصلى اللهم على محمد النبي الأمي.
Alhamdulillah.
بارك الله فيك.
MashaAllah. Thank you very much, Sheikh Jasir Auda. Very beautiful, wonderful talk and dua. Before I close, I would ask you to, show your face. We want to take some pictures for the sake of documentation. Okay. And then for the participants, if you could show yourself, your video, that would be better.
You take photos even online in Indonesia. MashaAllah. I remember there. Yeah.
I believe all of them are, they are familiar with you. You are so famous.
MashaAllah.
Here, your thought has been here since probably back in 2010 or 2011.
Yes. First time in Indonesia was 2008, I think, or 7. Yeah.
I remember.
MashaAllah.
You came here 2012. I wanted to come to UIN to see you, to listen to your, to listen to your talk. On that day, my first child was born.
Oh, MashaAllah. MashaAllah.
I have to choose.
MashaAllah. Allah bless you. Wow.
Thank you very much for
we'll see you, inshallah.
And for the participation from the audience.
We'll stay in touch, inshallah. Jazakumullah.
Inshallah, see you again in the next public talk, still on the issue of Islamic epistemology, integration of knowledge, and Islamic. Inshallah, thank you very much. Inshallah, close our meeting by reciting Hamdalah, inshallah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. And then, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi.
Terima kasih Prof. Habib. Terima kasih mendampingi kami. Mohon arahan dan petunjuknya, Prof.
Insyaallah. Langsung pamit Profesor Jasir Auda karena sudah
capek sekali kesian tengah malam.
Thank you very much from Uni Muda Sorong.
Masya Allah, Masya Allah. Ya, alhamdulillah. Semoga bermanfaat.
Terima kasih, Pak.
Ya, sama-sama, Ustaz.
Dari Malaysia.
Ya, terima kasih
Masya Allah.
Ustaz Said Abdul Hamid. Masya Allah.
Masya
Dari
Allah.
Insef.
Ya,
Dari
insya Allah.
Istak. Masya
Ya.
Allah.
Nanti akan kita kolaborasi bersama Ustaz Said.
Insya Allah. Terima kasih.
Insya Allah.
Salam Pak Habib Khirzin. Terima kasih Pak Habib.
Insya Allah.
Ya, Ustaz Sifa ada di Malaysia ya.
Ya.
Ya, mudah-mudahan bisa
Ya, kita
banyak yang kita bisa kerjasama ini dengan
insya Allah.
Malaysia, insya Allah.
Insya Allah boleh,
Ya,
boleh.
ya,
Insya Allah.
ya,
Saya rasa ini ada satu agenda yang baik nih untuk
Ya.
Makassar nih.
Ya. Insya Allah.
Allah. Alright.
Thank you very much. Terima kasih banyak-banyak. Harap
Ya,
dapat
sama-sama.
jemput saya lagi ya. Insya Allah.
Ya.
Tapi soalan saya tak jawab.
Oh, mohon maaf kalau tak sempat jawab Profesor Jason Auda.
Enggak apa. Yang penting kita menimba ilmu
ya.
Ya.
Assalamualaikum.
Salam warahmatullahi.
Baik, terima kasih semuanya. Kita pamit ya. Insya Allah. Assalamualaikum.
Pak
Ya.
Rofik, ini mungkin